Hey, just a heads up that the following content may be disturbing or triggering for some listeners and is not appropriate for children. Please take care of yourself and others who may be listening with you. Welcome to the Bonus Babies Podcast, a show that has no easy answers, only hard questions.
I learned and really operate on reciprocity in relationships. Everyone should really recognize that it's not one-sided. I think foster care kind of teaches you this transactional relationship aspect where it's like you're supposed to be waiting for this person to give you things because you kind of feel entitled to that because you've been through so much trauma. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna wait for this thing to happen to me. And it doesn't teach you that relationships are reciprocal, right? You call other people and they call you, or you remember their birthday and you send them a card. They're not just sending you a card, and you think about the ways that you're being thoughtful. But luckily for me, I had those elements when I was younger with my grandparents, and so it wasn't something new I had to learn. It was more so things I had to remember about how an actual human functional relationship, platonic or otherwise, actually works, not just this systemic, transactional, weird version of it.
Can you tell me what you call the kids who you've cared for over the years?
We feel that the children that we receive coming into our home are bonuses. So we call them bonus babies.
I love that. This is your host, Jayne Amelia Larson, and I'm a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate volunteer for youth in foster care. Yeah, I know it's a mouthful. In the same way a CASA works, I explore all things in the foster care maze by talking to kids, parents, caregivers, attorneys, social workers, therapists, really anybody and everybody who will speak to me to keep the conversation open and the information flowing about all things CASA.
Hi there, this is Jake Eberly, the producer of the Bonus Babies podcast, and today, Jayne Amelia speaks with Ångela Quijada Banks. She's a former foster youth and an NAACP Image Awards nominee, an American award-winning author of the Black Foster Youth Handbook. As a nationally recognized community leader and philanthropist, she started the Soulful Liberation movement, impacting over 30,000 people to revolutionize historically oppressive systems through holistic health and healing trauma with coaching, workshops, training, and programming. Thank you for joining us. Here's Ångela Quijada Banks.
Okay, I am here with Ångela Quijada Banks. Thank you for your patience. Hi.
Hi again. I'm very excited to finally see you because, it's been a lot of back and forth, but that I was glad to connect.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that you are open to it. I know you're a really busy gal and you have important things that you're doing. And I have this little dream podcast, and then I get somebody great like you on it. So,
Aww.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. So, all right, so let's get into it. Tell me a little bit about who you are, how you're raised, where you're from, early childhood memories, whatever.
Let's see. Okay, so how I was raised was very much one piece with my grandparents and my uncle, simultaneously my aunt coming in and out of that experience, and also my mom and my dad. And with specifically my grandparents, I think my grandfather really inspired my love for education, my love for learning, to be inquisitive, to ask questions. He welcomed things like that. And he very much always created spaces for me to engage in, why does this thing happen the way it does? And so I had room full of encyclopedias on all kinds of things, A to Z, that I would study and learn. And with my grandmother, she taught very important core values like being an honest person and be very generous.
Yeah, and you said she didn't preach to you. She just lived it. She was a role model, right?
Yeah. And it wasn't something that she sat down and wrote or was like, hey, this is what it means to be a good person. It's just things that I've, seen how she showed up in the world. And I watched her as a kid, right? And I was around it. And looking back at that as an adult now, it's like, wow, those were some very clear guiding principles and things that I think have helped me to, when I felt lost or going through some of the most severe traumatic experiences, to really connect back to that feeling and that experience that my grandmother created. Just her living her life and just being who she is. And so I think that those are two key components, and as well as my uncle, who he was very much into swing dancing at the time, and he incorporated me into that. So there was like
swing dancing?
Yeah.
Swing dancing?
Like salsa.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, salsa,
Yeah.
swing, Lindy Hop. So he actually had a group called the Original Zoot Cats that he founded. I think for me, tagging along on, and it was my mom and him that did a lot of swing dancing together. And so tagging along in their events and watching them, they're twins, and doing swing dancing together, and how people would react to them and how they felt, how hard they were practicing and stuff, really inspired, I think, a lot of like my artistic abilities as well when I started doing, drawing and painting. And my family was very encouraging of those things. Simultaneously, as I said, I was also with my mom and my dad, who that was a very separate experience of more of like, I had no idea what was going on. A lot of those core values that my grandmother modeled were not modeled with my mother and my dad. And so it was very confusing as a child to have like this one experience of like home and familiarity, traditions. Like on Saturdays, we would have a tradition of me and my grandparents would go to breakfast, usually to some kind of like breakfast pancake diner or something. And then shortly after that, we would go to the swap meet, and my grandmother would give me like $20. I would ride in this little cart that she had, and I was small, right? So I just was in that cart, and then I got out when I found something that I liked, or we went past somewhere. And what was interesting about that was she would give me $20, but then she would still pay for the things that I wanted. So I never actually used the $20. And when I got back home, we would have lunch, and then I'd go back home and she would tell me to save my money. After that, we would order some pizza, go to Blockbuster at the time, if you remember Blockbuster.
Wow, Blockbuster, yeah.
And me and my grandfather would go, and I would get to pick 2 kid movies for me and my siblings. And my grandfather picked like 2 adult movies. And we had some donuts, we ordered pizza, ice cream.
So how old were you here? Because you remember it really well, like as if it's like yesterday.
It was like 7. Well, my memory, it probably was before that as well, but like 7.
Yeah.
Every time I came to live with them, I think the last time that I lived with them was when I was 13. So it was something to look forward to. Wednesdays we had picnics at the park. So it was just like things we like, okay, these are the days, this is what happens. And it was just such a beautiful time to be able to spend with my family and, have those memories.
Yeah, it sounds really nice and safe and but also engaging.
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah.
So me and my siblings really enjoyed it. We also were able on Saturday nights before the movie, able to like do any of our art. So whether that was one of us drew a picture and wanted to show and explain what that looked like. Or for me, I always had like acting skits that I created for me and my siblings to do, or songs that we wanted to sing that I knew my grandmother enjoyed. All kinds of stuff that we did, dance competitions for my grandmother to and my grandfather to judge. So that was a lot of stability, a lot of like family, a lot of core values even instilled in just living that. But then on the opposite end, going to how I was raised, there was also like, with my parents specifically, a lot of confusion, contradiction of those elements, and me saving money would be, selfish. Yeah, like really? I need to give my money to my parents. It was very confusing, I think, as a kid to try to like piece that together. I'm like, okay, this is this thing that's happening that feels good, that feels of what I call now home feeling. And then this other side of just like, there's always arguing, there's always an issue, there's always someone that's doing something wrong, physical abuse, just a lot of stuff. And just wanting that home feeling to be back and to just live there. So I would say that's at least a peek into, I think, that inner turmoil that ended up growing as well as I got older and as I started to try to piece things together to become an adult. It was just like, which one is the right thing? Because you know the feeling, but you don't know what that feeling really means in the context of life.
Right. And when you're a child, it's hard to know how to build that for yourself. You know, you're reliant on adults to help create that for you.
Yeah.
So you ended up being removed from your parents' home. What happened?
Yeah. So when I was 13, this is going to be as long story short as I can, but when I was 13, I found out that my biological father wasn't who I had been calling my dad my entire life.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And so that was a lot. What ended up happening there was that my mom ended up having feelings again for my biological father because he reached out. That's how I ended up finding out. He reached out through her Facebook account. I used to check her Facebook account before I went on to MySpace.
Ah, really?
My MySpace account.
Huh.
Yeah. And it was just one day she was at work and I checked her Facebook account. And it's important to note that she did have men regularly trying to message her. And that's what I would just block them or, tell them they were low lives or whatever I would say. But this one.
Right. So you were her gatekeeper?
Yeah.
Wow. And you were like 11?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I was like 12.
Okay, 12, right.
And yeah, so it was interesting because I get this message, right? And it's like a paragraph long talking about something, our daughter, and how his mother's dying wish was to have a relationship with his daughter. And I was just like, whoa, what is this about? And also all throughout my life, my grandmother had made different hints about like, that's not really your dad. That's not really, so I had that in the back of my mind, but I was like, oh no, what is this, And so he left a number and when my mom came, I told her the name and showed her the message. And she literally like locked herself in that room with a computer and a phone. And we didn't see her until like later on that night when she finally came out. She had the phone in her hand and she was like, here, your dad's on the phone. And I was like, my dad? So I'm thinking like my dad that I've been calling dad for the past rest of my life. And it was a different voice. And so I'm like, who is this? I give the phone back to her. She's like, no, this is your dad. Talk to him. And I'm like, this isn't dad though. She was like, no, you're real dad. And so,
gosh, that must have been confusing. Wow. So,
yeah.
And you're just a kid and just like, wow.
It was a lot at one time. And he's just like, hi, daughter. And yeah, I was just like, this is a lot. I don't know what you're expecting me to say, but, I think I just said something along the lines of like, hi. And he was like saying all these things. I don't remember everything that he was saying, but he was like saying how much he's been searching for me and he loved me and all these things. And I was just like, this is a lot. Like, you don't know me. What do you mean you love me? And I remember giving the phone back and I was like in tears at that point because it was just very overwhelming. And my mom like went back in the room and apparently, fell in love in the next 3 days. So within about a couple of weeks, a lot of things happened, but within a couple of weeks, we were on a train for 4 days to go see him in Tennessee. It was not a positive experience. That's a whole movie in itself, but essentially, it ended up being a situation where he and my mom wanted to create a whole new life without my siblings and just me. And
right, and you had younger siblings. You had 4 younger siblings at the time. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, and they were not of the same father.
No, and they were left actually with my dad, who at the time was homeless. So I ended up going, to Tennessee, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into because I thought And it was communicated to me that we were going to see him for a few days and then leave. But there was this whole other plan about creating a whole new life. So I was enrolled in school, and I think I was 7th grade at the time. So maybe I was 13. And I feel like at those moments, there's like so many things that happen that the timeline gets really like, what age specifically was this? But yeah, I think I was 13. So I ended up going to 7th grade, and I was told, not to talk to my siblings. My dad was trying to contact me. He was trying to figure out what was going on because, we were supposed to be there for a few days, and it was a week and then 2 weeks. And I let him know that I didn't know what was going on. Somehow I'm enrolled in school, and, there was talk about like my birth parents having another kid together. So I was just like, this is not right. I wasn't allowed to call my grandmother. I wasn't allowed to talk to any of my family.
Wow, you must have missed them all too, right?
Yeah, but I was told that because at that time I had said a lot that I wished I was the only child. Because I was a kid, and like my siblings got on my nerves. I would try to have like my own space, and they would invade it or take my stuff. My sister was stealing my clothes, just stuff like that. And I would be like, I wish I was the only child, or, I don't understand why you guys don't leave me alone. And so that's what my mom told me. You wish you were the only child, so you got your wish. So I don't want to hear you complaining about anything else. Yeah. And so that really taught me at that age, like, wow, so I brought this on myself. Like, I'm horrible. Like, how did I do this to myself? Why did I do that to them? And I blame myself for that in that moment. And fast forwarding, a lot of things happened during that experience. I realized that it wasn't going to end well. And so I ended up having to report what was going on at my school counselor's office at the time.
And when you say that, like, you mean about your feelings or about abuse or about, because I think you said that you were starting to get very depressed and you had suicide ideation, right? Was that then or was that later?
No, that wasn't at that time. That was later. Yeah. Well, I had suicide ideation. The first time I had suicide ideation, I was 10. So I would say it was on and off, but I know the particular time you're talking about, that was when I was 15.
Right.
But no, at that particular time, it was emotional, but at this particular time, my biological father had shared with me that he was a part of a lot of gangs. And so he said that if I continued to try to make contact with my siblings, that he would set a hit out on my siblings and my dad. So it was very much, and I know I'm not really communicating everything because I know it's a lot of things. So, but I'll just say that it was mentally and physically abusive. And there was a lot of things that I thought I understood what was happening at the time, even though I was 13. And I realized looking back that it was way even more severe than I had even could comprehend. But essentially, if I could wrap up the situation, it was a more so like hostage type of situation of my mom and myself. And I didn't know how to get out of that. And so I ended up starting to report to the counselor. And I'm saying reporting because at the time I was just talking to them and like I didn't know what was going on, but I realized now I was reporting. And eventually there was a situation that happened where I wasn't allowed to use any phones anymore. And I stuck to use a cell phone to call my dad, and who was in California and I was in Tennessee. And so I ended up calling him to try to get him to call police officers. And there were multiple cases of police officers coming to the door, but my mom, for whatever reason, lying and saying that, things weren't happening, what were happening. And there was one particular time where my dad tried to call the police and send them to the door. And I was just like an emotional wreck. I was like bawling, crying. And my biological father told the police that I was just, 13, having a fit. And it was, he's been dealing with this his whole life with me, which was a complete lie, right? Because I just met him. But the police, they took that for what it was because I was a crying teenager, right? And that's like normal. But that was not a normal situation at all. So I tried to let my dad know basically that I was leaving the school and I was going to try to figure out another way to get out, because I thought at that time my mom and I were on the same page about leaving. And I soon found out that she was not in the right headspace to be able to protect me and get me out of that situation, or get herself out of that situation. So I had to let the counselor's office at school know. And so I was escorted through a cop car to a police station. And from there, I was eventually moved to North Carolina, and my dad took several buses with my siblings to meet me at my grandparents' house there in North Carolina. And we were all reunited, and I had no idea what they went through. I learned about it later, as we are all adults now. But there was a lot of communication that had to be done eventually. And that was just with me by myself. But my mom, she actually stayed. She went back after I went to the police station. The cops went back to get her. And she ended up, after we were relocated in Tennessee, she went back and she tried to get me to come back through a very interesting way. But I ended up catching on sooner than later, which was good for me. And I ran back to the place. And then I ended up having to take a bus by myself to North Carolina. And then my dad came. And from there, we ended up moving with my grandparents, who are now in Washington State. And
are these the same grandparents that you knew from Anaheim?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. But all that time, you're like in the middle of a tug of war.
Yeah.
Which must have been awful. Just
Yeah.
awful feeling, especially if you don't really understand what's going on exactly, and you're trying to piece it together as it's happening.
Yeah, I think I really remember really wanting to live with my grandmother, but all at the same time, my mom would guilt trip me about not honoring my mother and my father. So I feel like religion played a really big part in whether or not I decided to stay with my grandparents, because it was like, oh, I'm dishonoring God. That would be bad, on top of all these other confusing situations that were happening. But yeah, so I ended up in Washington State. I only was there for 6 months. I skipped 8th grade and was in 9th grade at that particular time. So even psychologically, developmentally, socially, I was still kind of mixed up and behind, because if you have been following, I was in 6th grade. The moment I'm in 7th grade, I'm in this extremely traumatic experience. I went to 2 other middle schools as well. When I went to North Carolina, I was in middle school as well. I graduated 7th grade in North Carolina. And then I was supposed to go to 8th grade, but I skipped 8th grade, went to Washington State. It's like I went from 6th grade, which was connected to my elementary school, and then now I'm a freshman.
In high school, right. Yeah, right.
Like, what? So from there, my mom ended up dating someone else who she had met in Tennessee. And within 6 months, we were moved back to Tennessee. This time it was all of my siblings and me with this guy. And it came out that she was pregnant, which also caused grounds for us to be isolated from the rest of our family again. We weren't allowed to talk to anyone, not even my dad at this point. And we just tried to survive, honestly, at that point, because there was so much happening in that house, so much confusion. And from there, my dad ended up getting in contact with us, I think a year later, about a year or so after that. He ends up coming to pick us up from Tennessee, driving from North Carolina to pick us up. And we all get loaded into the van. And my mom had told us that they were working things out, and my dad had a house. And we found out halfway through the ride to North Carolina that there was no house. There was no house. And so I'm freaking out, because I kind of already see how this cycle is going to go. And it slowly goes that way. So basically, we end up going into a 1-bedroom hotel, all of us. And I, at this point, was calling all different uncles and aunts, can me and my sister come stay with you? Could me and my brother come stay with you? Just trying to find some arrangements for myself and my siblings. And
you're doing this,
yeah.
Right? You're the one. Yeah. Because you said you were the parent, and it does sound like you were the parent. You were totally parentified.
Yeah, I mean, I had always been looking after my siblings in every one of these situations. If I was physically there or not physically there. When I was physically there, I always made sure that they had food, they took their baths or showers, that they had clothes. I would talk to different school organizations about places where we could get clothes. And I was also talking to my friends because they often had little brothers and stuff, and they had clothes that older brothers grew out of. And so I was able to provide that definitely for my brothers. And so fast forward to that, I think at this point I was 15. There's a lot of different things that happened there as well. I was heavily into the church. I ended up being, unfortunately, in a cult for a short period of time. Luckily left that. And, I think just trying to get back to that feeling of home, get back to some safety, and never really feeling that at the time. And it just was so overwhelming to always something extreme and traumatic and dramatic happening, and just wanting it to be simple and peaceful and loving, very loving. So I ended up turning 16 in a hotel room. I remember that. I was very disappointed because not only because obviously that these situations had happened over and over again, it was the reality of my mom when I was 7 or 8 telling me that I was going to have a quinceañera because I'm Hispanic and African American and Indigenous. So I thought that, okay, even though things at 7 or 8, things are going wrong now, in a few years, everything's going to work itself out, right? And the reality of 15 happening, and I didn't get a quinceañera, and then telling me that I was going to have a sweet 16, right? And it was a very sour 16 in the hotel room. And just trying to figure out where I went wrong. Did I somehow say something that created this or did something? And so that's when I ended up in foster care at 16.
Because you made the call yourself?
No. I, at this point, had been to about 20 different schools. And so I was a new kid again, and I was mute, and I wasn't talking to anyone. I just wrote notes. When you're the new kid, it could go either way. Either everybody wants to know, well, everybody definitely wants to know about you and who you are, but it could either be a really good thing or a not good thing. I had just left a really not great thing in Tennessee, which was a lot of bullying, honestly, and just really the whole school, because it was a small town and stuff. So I was very optimistic that, at least I would have a clean slate, I guess.
I just can't imagine anybody bullying you because you're angelic. I mean, who would want to do that? But I know kids do stuff like that. I'm sorry.
Long story short with that, it was just kind of I had some really close female friends. There was this guy that really liked me at the time. I started to like him. He had a brother. His brother also liked me. My close friend liked the brother, and he didn't like her back, and ended up being kind of planting different rumors. And she was my close friend, so people believed her because she was my close friend. And it just kind of exploded from there. It was absolutely insane. I don't wish it on anyone. The entire school to bully you. Something I don't really talk about much, but yeah, it's something that now that I think about it, I probably should talk about more, because it's definitely something that affects a lot of people, not necessarily the whole school, but at that time, at 16, I was in high school. And
you're not talking to anybody. You're just writing notes. You basically shut down.
Yeah, and
right?
What happens is that throughout class, I end up just profusely having tears run down my face. I'm not saying anything. And so the teachers, are getting concerned. And I was trying to participate. I know my inner self was you got to talk. You have to do this. You have to. And I think my spirit and who I was just so tired, just I can't take any more of this. I don't know why I keep on trying to push myself to do this. What's the point? No one cares. Why am I doing this? My mom at the time had left in the middle of the night. And so she had done that multiple times as well. She would leave and go with whoever her previous boyfriend was. So this particular time, we woke up and she was gone. And I remember being in science class, and I love my science teacher. Can't remember her name. I need to remember her name. But I wasn't crying at the time. I think I was just not really talking, not really engaging. And I would ask to use the bathroom a lot of times so I could just put water over my face and, I don't know, try to get myself to talk to people. But I would come back to the classroom and, it would be the same, which was also very frustrating. But she wrote me a note to the counselor's office. Then my Spanish teacher wrote me a note to the counselor's office. And it kind of went down in a chain where all my teachers wrote me a note and I wouldn't go. At first, I just like, okay, cool. Like, I don't really want to talk to anyone about this because I know it's a lot and it's horrible, but I don't really want to talk about it. So at first I wasn't going. Then the first few times I started going and I started talking to the counselor, started opening up a little bit. I would say like maybe 5 words within the hour. But I realize now, looking back, that was a lot of progress. And over time I started sharing, and it was hard because the questions that they asked I knew would be incriminating to my parents. And that was what I realized was the big piece of why I wasn't talking.
Right. You didn't want to say the truth of what was going on because you were afraid of what would happen to them and maybe your family. Right?
And also what would happen to me as well.
And you. Yeah. And made the whole thing worse.
Because I'm not honoring my mother and my father. Right.
Right.
So if I'm talking negatively about them, even though if the negative is the truth. So it was a lot of internal, like just, I don't know what I'm doing. How am I going to get out of this, all this stuff. But I just had to share with them. I was sleeping under an air conditioner at the time in the hotel room, partially to shield myself from getting physically hurt by one of my parents or both. I was eating rice water, which sounds crazy now, but white rice and microwave bologna. So it was really difficult for me to concentrate in school as well because like there's nothing nutritious about that over time in, sink water. That's not great. So I think over time, them asking me those questions and the answers that I gave, I was referred to a school social worker, and she kind of laid out all these things that I would need to do: get a job, start taking showers at the school, all these things. And I just felt really exhausted on top of all the other things I was already doing, like walking 1.5 miles on the highway to school at 4 a.m. A lot of stuff. Because I was very passionate about school, and ever since I was little, I really had dreams of going to college. And again, my grandfather instilled that into me. And so it was just kind of like, it seemed so simple to get there, right? Like learn, make good grades, which I was good at the time, and have fun. Like it seemed very simple, but then like no one said about, all this other stuff that happens in life for some people. And I was just kind of confused on how I was supposed to get past that. So I think they kind of, with all those different elements, ended up making the decision that it's not the best situation, especially them asking about like my siblings and, what their experience has been like. And yeah, so there was some intervention there, and eventually we were moved and we were with our aunt and uncle on my dad's side. That was our first placement. Sadly, that didn't work out, and we were separated by gender. So me and my sister were placed in one home. And then at the time I had 4 brothers, but one brother, the youngest one, was able to stay with my mom. So 3 of my brothers were with a different foster parent.
Right. So you're all separated, and you didn't have just one move, right? You had many placements.
Yeah. So from there, I ended up moving to another foster parent, and I really liked her. Me and my sister had her, and I thought that she was definitely one of the best. And then I went to college, and I was moved to a different placement. My sister as well. Also, I think that was really hard as well, like already having my brothers separated and being like a mother figure to them for so long. And then everyone's telling me like, just worry about yourself, like just worry about what you're doing. And it's like, how do I do that? I don't, like you're saying that, but I don't know what that means, or is that really the right thing that I'm supposed to be doing?
But amazingly, through all this, you're just still so dedicated to your education and to your own progress, even though you're obviously super torn and you feel guilty and you're worried about what's going to happen to your siblings. You were still able to move forward.
Yeah.
And also get help.
Yeah.
To accept help, right?
Well, I knew that I didn't know it all. Like I knew when I was 17 and I was having therapy, I opted in for therapy because I said, well, I've been through a lot of stuff. There's no way that I'm just going through all this stuff and I'm okay. Like, I need to make sure I don't want to. And this is what I told whoever coordinated it, because they were like, are you sure that's something what you want? I was like, yeah, I mean, I've been through a lot of things. And then now I'm in foster care. Like, I don't know if I'm harming other people unintentionally. I don't want to do that when I get older. I don't want to be a person that says, well, it's because I was physically abused at this age that this is why I'm this way and I don't change it. That was something that was really important to me. I never wanted to unintentionally or even intentionally. I don't know which is worse, but I didn't want to harm people because of my past experiences or based because of something that happened to me, because I had been around and a recipient of that hurt of so many people that had that belief system. That's the things that they said to me. So at that age, I knew, like, okay, I'm not going to be like that at all. Like, I don't know the whole path of what that's going to look like, but I know for sure I'm not going to pretend like all these different things haven't affected me.
Right. And you also realize that harming yourself would really harm the people you cared about.
I never really had an idea about harming myself, physically harming myself, but I did have suicide ideation, so I guess that would be a way of harming myself.
Yeah, that kind of qualifies, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So you also talked about that you realized then, and you were on this just a moment ago, you knew you had to be proactive about getting better yourself. That ultimately, even with help, it was going to be up to you.
Yeah.
How did you come to that?
Well, I would say that it probably started really when I was younger, even younger than 17 or 16, because when I first had like the suicide ideation around 10, it looked more so like I was in the kitchen and mentally I would start thinking about knives, and then knives, what that would look like to harm myself, like in my life. I remember sharing that with my mom, and that's what they kept telling me was, only you can shake that out, like shake that off. Only you can change your mind about that. And even though at that time I really didn't feel like only I could do it, because I didn't understand like why I was having those thoughts. Those thoughts were very, very severe at the time, and it felt like an urge, a strong urge, lots of words going on in my head. So in order for me to stop having that kind of thought process to go down and those urges, I had to, within myself, make a commitment that I wanted to live, which it seems, again, so trivial, but that was such a difficult process as well, because it was all internal about why don't I want to live? Like, even though I feel like I do, but why am I getting these messages that I don't? Like, what is happening? And a lot of it was just like suppressed trauma, right? Suppressed feelings of like, I'm not good enough and all this other stuff. That decision at 17, I think, was just a buildup of like, okay, if I'm ever given the chance to get out of this situation, these situations, because there was multiple throughout my life, then I'm going to take it. And not only am I going to take it, I'm going to utilize everything that I can in order to completely get myself out, completely change my life. And if it's just me that holds me back, then I can overcome that. I can overcome me. And the problem, though, right, as a kid, is that it's never just you. It's you. Your whole life is on other adults and other people. And if you're in foster care, then there's other layers there. But in those moments, recognizing and asking yourself, like, what is it that I can do to ground myself, to make myself feel connected in this moment? And who do I need to have myself around? How does this really feel? How does this really benefit me or not benefit me? How am I benefiting other people?
So is this what prompted you to write your book? And can you tell us about that? That is the Black Foster Youth Handbook.
Yeah, what ended up happening is I got out of foster care. I was forcibly transitioned out of foster care is what I call it now, but I was given a 7-day notice. And partly that was because I didn't have people in place that were advocating for me.
You didn't have a CASA, right?
Yeah, I didn't have a CASA at the time. I did have a guardian ad litem earlier, which is what they call CASAs in North Carolina. But she was removed from my case due to the fact that she was trying to provide housing for me in between placements.
Yeah.
So obviously that's a violation of the code and conduct.
Right.
So, but we still remained in contact. So like I just came from North Carolina and I was staying at her house, ironically.
Is that where you just were on your holiday? You were visiting her?
Yeah. And she is now Aunt Liza. She's not just Liza, but she's Aunt Liza. So shout out to Aunt Liza. I think that experience, not being able to age out successfully, because the subtitle of the book is 50 plus lessons I learned to successfully age out of foster care and holistically heal. And I did it. And I think a lot of people think when they step into a youth's life that they're an expert in some way of some experience and they have all the tools, right? But you genuinely have no idea what that youth had went through. You have no idea. They may not ever tell you everything, right? Or even some of it. But I think the element that has been so healing for me, and why 10 years, it's from 16 and I'm now 26, that I've maintained a relationship with my guardian ad litem, is one, because, I learned and really operate on reciprocity in relationships. Everyone should really recognize that it's not one-sided. I think foster care kind of teaches you this transactional relationship aspect where it's like you're supposed to be waiting for this person to give you things because you kind of feel entitled to that because you've been through so much trauma. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna wait for this thing to happen to me. And it doesn't teach you that relationships are reciprocal, right? You call other people and they call you, or you remember their birthday and you send them a card. They're not just sending you a card. And, you think about the ways that you're being thoughtful. But luckily for me, I had those elements when I was younger with my grandparents. And so it wasn't something new I had to learn. It was more so things I had to remember about how an actual human functional relationship, platonic or otherwise, actually works. Not just this systemic, transactional, weird version of it. And it's also in foster care, they're supposed to, they're getting paid to do this, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So you just kind of forget that piece. So I think that was also an element that I conveyed in the Black Foster Youth Handbook, because it's really not about just you. And I think when I was going through my experience, I had to just think about me because I was in survival mode. I had to think about how I was going to live. Simultaneously, of course, I'm thinking about my siblings as well. But I think going through foster care, getting isolated from my siblings, and people are telling you, focus on yourself, focus on becoming independent and all this other different stuff. But that's not the reality of a human experience either. You're supposed to be interdependent. You have some things you do on your own, but if you're not able to do it, you have someone you're able to call and connect with. And that doesn't mean you have this codependency on anyone, but it does mean that you need relationships, you need people, you need humans to connect with. And that love and that connection is not replaceable by anything else. So
let me ask you, if you hadn't had examples of that as a child with your extended family, with your grandmother, grandfather, you think you could have been able to find that later?
I really don't know. And that's something that I think about a lot with youth that are in foster care.
Yeah, because some of them never have that.
And that's part of the reason why I wrote my book as well, is because I think with people who have foster care experience, we're all looking for the place where we belong, where we are able to exist without any other expectations. I think about that connection that I have with my grandmother, and I just went to go see her for her 80th birthday in December 2021. And, I'm an author, I'm a coach, I'm a speaker, I'm a lot of things, and I've traveled across the world. I'm very proud of that, but I also am so proud to have a space and a person. I could just come over there. She does tell me how proud of me she is and all these things, but even if I wasn't any of these things, right? Even if I didn't make a difference in the world, I know that that person, my grandmother, she still loved me. I still belonged. I still, I did age out of the relationship. The contract didn't end, and now, it's inappropriate to continue the relationship. It's something that I know she loves me no matter what. And it's that feeling, that connection. And she's known me since before I was even born. That's another layer of self-esteem that I know that a lot of people aren't able to have foster care experience ground themselves into. And I think that's the piece that people are trying to recreate. And I don't know if you can recreate that. I don't have that answer. But I do know that the relationships that you create, if you're in foster care specifically, are those relationships that can change your life and that can positively impact you, positively connect you to a sense of home that you're able to define for yourself and within those people. Because home is not a place, right? It's a feeling, it's a spirit, it's an energy, it's something you're able to hold within yourself and other people. Like, someone feels like home. My husband, he feels like home.
That's right. You're married now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't have any kids yet, but you've got a bunch of furry animals at home.
I do have a bunch of furry animals. I really thought that I was just going to have one cat. We ended up going to the cat lounge here in San Diego and ended up with two. And they didn't really like each other until they did a lot. And so now we have 6 cats. We're not planning on keeping 6 cats, but that escalated very quickly from the idea of 1 cat. So, but I do plan on having children. Well, my husband and I, we want to have 3 children. We have no control over that, right? It just depends on we're going to get what we get.
Yeah.
But definitely want to have children for sure. It's something I've always dreamt about, thought about. But it's also, I feel like it would have been irresponsible of me not to create that space for myself of healing, right? And create that space of continued growth and evolution of my mindset and where is the space that I'm able to hold for those traumas that very real, that are very real and happened, and where does that fit, right? And it doesn't fit in my life and in my future, but where can I place that and leave it where it is? Not carry that on with me through unconscious ways and project that on other people, and they have literally nothing to do with it at all. So.
And you're a healing practitioner now. And so you went, as you described, from essentially Dante's 9th circle of hell.
Yeah, I remember I had shared that with you when we talked. Yeah.
Where you dwelt. That's where you dwelt for quite a while.
Yep.
And now you're on a whole new path.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are your hopes and dreams for the work that you do?
I love that question. I love that you brought that up about the level of hell, because I think some people feel like that's a little bit of an exaggeration, right?
Oh, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I can tell by looking at you and listening to you. No, there's obviously been some really deep suffering.
Yeah, it definitely was hard. It was so hard. And I think even to this day, there's certain things that the biggest lesson I learned recently, right, was boundaries. And so a lot of my work is focused on, let's get on this journey of healing. It doesn't mean that you have to have it all figured out and all the answers to all the things. But I think about particularly my experience with my parents, and to this day, they're still not on the journey of healing.
They're not. You are, and you're, wow.
And so I think about all the lives that have been touched by them, and unfortunately the chaos and the pain and the trauma they've caused other people. And just imagine if instead they had decided to go on a journey of healing and self-awareness and making a different legacy, because we all create legacies whether we want to or not, of healing and positive impact. And I think for me, that's really what my work is representing, is you can break free from anything, no matter how deep and horrible and traumatic the experiences are. You don't have to live there. You can heal and you can get on that journey, and it's going to be crazy because you're going to have to learn something you've never learned before, understand, and evolve mentally, emotionally, spiritually into this whole other being. But it's worth it, because think about the impact that you're making on other people just by living that and being that. And that goes back to getting out of me. Woe is me. It was such a horrible thing, and it's all about me. And because it's not all about you. Your experience isn't all about you. It's also about the other people. It's about in what ways can you give back, and that ripple effect that you're giving to other people. So the work that I do is really around healing, around freedom to be who you really are outside of the confines of trauma, and just living your life. Like, live your life, not surviving, not crisis mode after crisis mode after crisis mode. And after a while, if you've lived in those experiences like I was then creating experiences like that, right? Because you're so used to it, you subconsciously create these experiences. And so I would say that's probably the foundation of everything that I do: coaching, speaking, writing, everything.
And here we are recording on Juneteenth.
Yeah.
You know, which is kind of great.
So beautiful.
I want to ask you a question I ask all my guests, and if you can dig deep, and I know you can. What is the one thing that no one would ever know about you unless you told them?
You know, I think I'll say that I'm an artist. And I'll say that because, you know, I've been very more vocal on like political issues. I think I've also been in a lot of congressional televised events and things like that. And I think I'm an artist. And that's something that I am in my adult life exploring and being more vocal about. So you will be hearing more about it. I used to draw, paint, sing, dance, and I suppressed that version of myself for a while, right? So yeah, stay tuned for more artistic work from Ångela.
I'm looking forward to that, really. Listen, I want to thank you so much for being part of this today. I know people listening are going to be very moved by your story. Now I'm also wondering, though, if you could say one thing to a kid who is going through a rough time in their family and in care, what would you say?
I know that this is so horrible and painful and saddening. However, this is not something that is going to define the rest of your life. This is a moment. This is a phase. This is a chapter, if you will, from the millions of chapters and little moments and happy experiences you will be able to create and are able to create even today. So you can truly make that choice to see this as a moment in your life, a time where you're going to look back 10 years from now, as I am, and laugh, and even, you know, maybe even cry and say, wow, that was hard, but I made it through. And my life is completely different now because you have that choice. You can make a different choice than the choices that were laid out for you and in front of you and shown to you every day. You don't have to be anything like any of the people that made you feel like you didn't want to exist anymore. There's a purpose for why you are existing, and I invite you to connect to that purpose, and I invite you to, and it may be hard at first, but just start to see the positives in your day-to-day to help you shape the way you're able to see the world, because I know how painful that is. I know how hard it looks to even think about the next day or a year from now or 10 years from now. It's like unfathomable. But you are worth so much more than the pain and the trauma and the hurt that you've experienced. And you can create something way farther than your wildest dreams, even now. You are cared about, you are seen, and you are not alone.
That's really nice. Thank you so much, Ångela. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ångela, for telling your story. I can't emphasize enough how important it is for your story to be told and to give the message that it can be up to you to change what your future holds. You don't have to listen to what people tell you your future is going to be, and you're a good example of that. So please keep doing what you're doing for anybody who might be listening. And again, her book, The Black Foster Youth Handbook. Thank you, Ångela. And next week's guest is Sid Stewart. She's an artist, filmmaker, and poet. Most recently, Stewart's work was selected by the National Endowment for the Arts' 50th anniversary, and Sid is also the founder of Better Youth, a nonprofit organization which uses mentoring and media arts to equip foster and community youth with creative confidence. Thank you for listening. Be well. See you next week. If you see something, say something. If you suspect a child's health or safety is jeopardized in any way by parents or anyone else, contact the Child Protective Services Agency in your county. 24-hour hotlines are staffed by trained social workers who will help you through the process, and you can do so anonymously. In California, you can call the Child Protection Hotline at 800-540-4000. So if you see something, say something. You might be saving a child's life. If you want to know more about becoming a CASA anywhere in the country, go to nationalcasagal.org, and in LA, casala.org. And if you want to know more about becoming a foster parent, check out the National Foster Parent Association at nfponline.org. There's also faithfosterfamilies.org and adoptuskids.org. There's tons of other information online as well, so you can just hunt around. We also want to thank the supremely talented Christina Apostolopoulos for her beautiful original music. You can find her music on Spotify or Instagram at Christina Aposto. And also thank you to Yukon Har for his engineering. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you hear and you find it as valuable as we do, please rate us and hit subscribe. You can also make a donation at bonusbabies.org. See you next time.